I'm already sweating. Hey everyone, what is up? It's NgynMusic, and today I'll actually show you guys how I layer my chords and how I usually will treat them. So how I process them, how I layer them, and what I use. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to show you guys is the example track that I made. So it might be loud, so just letting you know. 1, 2, 3. I have most of these already bounced on audio, including the chords, but I'm going to actually open up the chords themselves. I'm going to mute everything else. So it's just the chords right now, and this is what they sound like. First thing I'm going to go over is the voicing of the chords, or how many notes you have in each chord. Why is that important? That's important because if you have too little voicings or too little notes in the chords, what's going to happen is it's going to sound really thin. But also if you have too many, it could get wishy-washy and it might just sound really crowded and really like you can't tell what chord it actually is. So you have to find the right amount of voicing. Right here I have an example of just the chords that I was playing earlier, but just pretty much the 3 notes. Which is fine. This is completely fine. But if you only play those triads with the Supersaws, it's gonna sound like this. It's fine to me, but the thing is like I like to have a little bit of top notes to actually give the listener a little bit more to expect, but also you can get creative by adding melody notes on top. So that's why I have something like this to compared to. So to keep in mind about your chords, you just want to make sure that you have enough chords on root notes of the chord itself, so your basic 3. And then you can also add your top notes, which gives it more color. Which lets the listener know that there's more than just the basic 3. It's probably clipping like hell. Another thing to worry about is the actual octave you are playing in. Because if you play these way too low, it's going to sound really, really bad. It's going to sound like this. Okay, wait. That actually sounds pretty good. Never mind. What I'm trying to say about the chords being played too low is that they could sound really muddy, and it sounds something like this. You have to find the right octave that you're going to play at. If it's on piano, you can step a little lower because the piano can produce those type of notes. But then when it comes to supersaw chords, you have to be very careful. If you play this too low, it's going to sound really bad. That's going to ruin the whole entire mix, because if I just play it now, you can't even hear it, right? So if you play it loud enough or you play it high enough, it's suddenly there. So if I turn off the processing, what I usually have is one layer for the main chord sound, another mono signal, a white noise signal, and then another one possibly usually for a texture or just to add something different. Because I'll be honest, a lot of the songs that have chords in them are going to be supersaws, and supersaws are a very easy thing to make, which is why you hear it a lot in like, you know, feature bass, melodic dubstep. Any EDM song with chords will have supersaws, and so you have to find a way to make it sound a little different. So main thing, the first chord sounds like this. And the next one I have is the mono chords. And then this is the one that's actually textured, or it kind of sounds different, not your normal Supersaw chords. And then there is the white noise. Just noise. When it comes to Supersaws, the basic way of doing it, pretty much you're taking your saws and then you're pretty much just detuning the living shit out of it. So right now, sounds like this. Sounds like shit, but I'll show you guys how to make it better. First things first is that you want more voices in the chords itself. This adds phasing and the natural chorus effect. So let's say maybe 7 voices. If you listen to it now, it's just louder. What happens though when you start to detune is that you slowly start to hear them go across the stereo field. I'll play it and then I'm just gonna slowly turn up the detune knob. And then this is when it's over dramatic or like it's overdone. Now, you can achieve this with the chorus itself. Which actually might be better for some songs. I find that putting a chorus on actually makes it weaker, but to each of their own. Pretty much, if you're playing it at a good octave, you can pretty much either add another layer underneath. So by making a supersaw chord and putting it down 1 octave, which might sound good. I mean, let's see. Which it does. But also, there's nothing stopping you from putting it up 1 octave. Now, do keep in mind though, the lower you play the notes, the less detune you want, as you don't want much phasing in the low end. You pretty much want to make sure anything around under 500 hertz is going to be mono compatible, or at least not interfering with the side signals. So the next thing is the mono signal itself. Now, why do you need a mono signal? The mono signal is what makes your chords stand out, even if, let's say, your speakers don't handle stereo. Most venues, most places, most like speakers, like Bluetooth speakers, can't produce stereo that well. So you need at least something to have in the midfield. So the mids are gonna sound like this. Turn off the arpeggiator. And also, if I pretty much just play it and turn my entire master into mono, there's still mids, lows, and highs. I mean, you don't want too much lows, but in general, you want them to be audible. Because most of the times, if you play with these, if you play the ones that are, you know, completely detuned, but like there's no stereo image, it's gonna sound like this. Which might work, but once you start mixing it and you start mastering, you know, things go out of whack the moment that you start adding other elements. So if I play all of these without the mid signal, it's gonna sound like this. I'll turn on my effects stream. See, that's in mono, and the chords are just there. But if you add the mono layer, it sounds like this. It's just enough for you to hear it in mono. I mean, I'll be honest, most of the time it's going to be in stereo. If you have even modern speakers, should be fine. The next thing is textured, or the special kind of chords. The special chords, I usually make them out of serum. You can achieve it with silent, but that is questionable. But it sounds like this. And what I did pretty much to make these sounds different is the comb filter. I do like to have another layer on top of my normal chords to make it at least sound different. So adding the comb filter, and based on how much I mix in the comb filter, it adds a little bit of difference to the Supersaws. Now I am playing the exact same chords or the exact same notes on all the layers, including the white noise signal, but you don't have to. You can actually just bring this up an octave or change the notes, which will be subtle, but it will be enough to change the perception of the chords. So if I play them all together now, and if I take off that special layer, it just loses a little bit of top end. So I like to have that in there just to give it a little bit of sparkle. The next thing I'm going to go over is the white noise signal. Most of the times when you have really detuned chords, what ends up happening is in mono, you lose the top signal. Because most of the times your chords are going to die in the other sounds that's going to happen. I mean, there's always going to be a kick and a bass and a snare and then percussions, you know, all those things are going to add a little bit of top end noise. And when there's enough and your chords are already phasing, you're not going to hear it. So I like to just have a layer of white noise, which sounds like this. I'm just cutting anything under 2 and then cutting even more around 3 and then just taking a little bit of that top end just because sometimes it does get a little bit too tinny after you process everything. So if I play the chords now with the no processing and then I add in that white noise, it just comes in very, very, very lightly. But it adds enough that you can actually hear it. And if you play all these in mono, and you take away that white noise and play it, that actually helps a lot. The next thing I'm going to go over is just the processing. Processing for my chords change time to time. So the first thing I do actually is I send all my chords to the same bus. So chord 1, chord 2, chord 3, and the 3x oscillator is sent to chord master. And then I just level them. I make sure that they just fit well. Alright, and then the white noise. Now the white noise is generally always going to be really quiet compared to everything else because it just needs to be at the high end. It doesn't need to be noticeable in the entire chord. It just needs to be noticeable in the top end, so it's really low. Most of the times what's going to happen is if you play it in mono, there's going to be a shit ton of phasing in the low end because you haven't cut out the low end in the actual mix itself. First thing is I EQ. I EQ out anything under 100 because that's where a lot of the sub is. So if I just solo the chords right now, there's a crap ton of low end. So if I solo out just the low end, so all that is just noise. That's all just unnecessary signal, and it's gonna mess up the phase with your bass, and that's really important because you want low end to be as tight and as crispy as possible. So I'm gonna bring it up to the point where I hear just enough low end, but obviously not sub. Usually anything past the mids, there's going to be some resonant frequencies. So if I play it now and I raise up these resonant frequencies, like that's super annoying to the ear. So I would just bring that down maybe 6. That hurts. So bring it down a little bit because it's not as noticeable. And then if I just raise the other ones, just be mindful of what you're EQing and how much of it. I mean, here I did go a little drastic, but that's also because I'm bringing it back up with more effects. After the EQ, what I have next is usually actually a reverb. The reverb is set super low, like 25%, 0.8 second delay, and then I'm usually actually EQing more out. So if I take out the dry signal and let you hear it, that's what the reverb sounds like. And I'm only mixing in about 20 to 25%. It's just there because what's going to happen later is I'm actually going to bounce this to audio and I'm going to cut out the reverb tail because with the reverb on the actual chords, it kind of softens everything out, especially when you start to add other things. OTT has this thing where it softens a lot of sounds, but it can also have the ability to make soft sound harsh. That's why people use it on bass because it really brings out everything. Most of the time, I'm just bringing it up to a point where near like 20%, 30%. So at 100%, it just brings everything up. So just bring it up slowly and then right to the point where it sounds good. If you already set your master chord already to a low signal or a low level, yes, it's going to sound quiet. The reason why I actually have it so low is because I usually will actually add a saturator, or in this case only the Fruity Wave Shaper, which is my go-to for saturation. If I have it at a regular signal, which might work, I mean, if you play it. Right, it sounds fine, but there are some frequencies that aren't balanced, or it sounds like there's missing frequencies. So what I would do is actually bring it down a little bit and then bring in the wave shaper. Now what you're going to hear is these chords are actually going to pop out and they're going to sound a lot more full. So if I play now and then I slowly raise the amount, it smoothens everything out, but it also fills in the gaps and it makes everything constant, which is important because your chords are going to be played either sustained or even if it's just a stab, you still want all the frequencies to be heard, or the main frequencies of the chords. If you notice, the low end actually comes back once you add all these effects. There is always going to be a little bit of low end that leaks through. So usually I'll have, my EQ after my saturation, because OTT and wave shaping and saturation in general just brings up artifacts and noise that are pretty much quiet in the sound itself. So what you gotta do is, if you're gonna bring up things, you have to take away the low end that comes out of it. So I usually just put another EQ, and this one I just did more tasteful kind of EQing where I did take out a lot of the low end. So I'm taking out a lot of low end and I'm kind of going above 120 just because I have to let the other things breathe too. So the bass and the sub is going to be important. So I usually just take away a little bit more than what I did on the first EQ, and then the tasteful EQing where I bring up or take away some of the very harsh frequencies. Like I know for sure like 5K. Like even just 1 dB of boost, you can hear that. Right, and then when you master it, it gets even worse. It sounds way worse. So usually I'll bring it down just enough to the point where it sounds a little bit more softer. It helps if you have vocals actually, because you can actually play them both at the same time, and what's going to happen is you'll be able to hear when the chords overlap or are sounding like they're on top of the vocals. So 200 hertz to 2K is where things get really muddy, but usually chords are going to get really stuffed within the 1K area. So I'm just bringing it down by not even a full dB, like 0.9. So after you have your whole entire processing done, as you can see, my CPU chokes out because there's just too many voicings, a lot of processing going, and that's just the chords. So if I play it, I'm almost crapping out on my CPU. If you're like me and your projects get way more complex than this, if you're like me, what you would want to do is actually to bounce out your main things into audio. I have it here, the chords here, and they sound like this now, and they're already sent to a mixer. The main gist of it is you want to actually render it out as audio, because now this gives you the chance to actually take out any reverb tail. So if you listen to this, there's a little bit of that tail. Kind of unnecessary when you have all the other things going on. So what I would do is pretty much just take out any of the dead space. Just to be safe, I would just take it out. After that, you're just left with the clean signal. Which is going to fit perfectly with the track. It's going to sound like this now. And now you don't have to worry about the chords leaking into all the other things. So that's pretty much it on how I layer and process my Supersaw chord. Most of the times this is how I usually do it. There are some changes depending on the song itself. Like obviously this type of chord doesn't work on like softer melodic tracks. Sometimes you don't need OTT and a saturator. Sometimes you don't even need the reverb. But this is the main sound, or the main processing chain that I usually go for. I will try to go more in depth about other chord sounds that I have or usually that I hear. But for now, that's all. Take care. Goodbye. Fuck. Right? Yeah. Fuck. Whatever. It's and my throat is my throat is really dry. Guys, is the okay.